Arizona Territory, 1879. The wind howled over the Superstition Mountains, dry and cracked like old leather, and Delaney Tabor's laugh echoed off the canyon walls loud enough to scare a hawk off its perch. She had not meant to laugh. Not really. Not when the preacher's wife had just told her, for the 5th time this week, a woman ought to keep herself quieter if she ever hopes to be chosen. But as the woman's nose wrinkled, and her lips pinched like she had just bit into a sour persimmon, Delaney could not help it. The laugh burst out of her like a runaway colt, full-bodied and bright. It dropped the room into silence. Every head in the small church hall turned. Some smiled awkwardly. Most frowned. Delaney stood straighter, brushing her palms on her worn blue skirt. "Excuse me," she said, though she did not mean it. That was when she caught sight of him. A tall cowboy leaning against the doorframe, dusty hat in hand, boots streaked with trail dust. His eyes, a dust-colored blue, held a steady warmth behind the tired lines of road and sun. He looked right at her. And he said it clear as day, in a voice that filled the room like a thunder roll. "I ain't heard nothing better." Delaney blinked. Her heart gave a jump she had not expected. The preacher's wife sniffed and walked off. But the cowboy stayed where he was, watching her like she was not some awkward girl with a laugh too loud for polite society, but someone worth listening to. A week later she met him again. She was balancing a sack of flour on her hip outside the general store in Florence when the same cowboy stepped off his horse and tipped his hat. "Delaney," he said like he had known her name forever. She squinted at him. "You got a name yourself?" He grinned. "Tobias Kincaid." He had a voice that hummed low, like wagon wheels over solid ground. And when he smiled, it was not sly or practiced, just honest. She liked that. "You always make declarations in church halls?" she asked, shifting the sack into her arms. "Only when I hear something worth speaking up for." He took the sack from her without asking and fell into step beside her. They walked in silence for a minute down the dusty road, his shoulder close to hers. "You live around here?" she asked. "About 2 days southeast. Got a stretch of land near the Gila River. Run cattle, mostly. Just came into town for supplies." She nodded. "You got family?" He hesitated. "Used to. Folks passed. My brother left for California last year. Just me now." She nodded once. "Same." They stopped at the end of the road where her small cabin sat, squat and sunbaked under a crooked mesquite tree. He handed her the sack. "Thanks," she said. "Anytime." His horse snorted behind him. "I'll be in town through the week," he added, voice softer now. "If you feel like talking." She did not answer, just watched him ride off, hat low over his brow, dust rising behind him like smoke. The next morning, she found him waiting outside the smithy. "I got a spare horse," he said. "Feel like riding?" The truth was, she had not ridden in years. Not since her father had died and she had to sell the family's mare for firewood money. But something in Tobias's gaze, quiet and steady, made her nod. They rode out past the cottonwoods, following the river. She talked more than she meant to. Told him about her father, about the little farm that had gone dry, about the neighbors who whispered about her laugh like it was a sin. He listened. Really listened. And when she laughed again loud and full, at something he said about a stubborn mule in his herd, he laughed, too. Not at her. With her. By the time they turned back, the sun was falling low. He looked at her as they reached her porch. "You do not need to quiet yourself for anyone." She swallowed. "You say that now. I will say it tomorrow, too." The next day, she found herself waiting for him. He brought her a jar of wild honey and a small carved horse he said he whittled on the trail. She laughed again when she saw it because the legs were uneven and the tail stuck out crooked. He looked proud anyway. "I made it for you," he said. "Figured you might keep it." She brushed her fingers over the smooth wood. "You are not like the others." "Neither are you." That night she sat on her porch, the wooden horse in her hand, and wondered how fast a heart could change course if it had been drifting too long. But on the fourth day, he did not come. By sundown, she was pacing. By morning, she saddled a borrowed horse and rode toward the Gila. Her chest burned with worry she could not name. It took her until dusk to reach his land. The fences were in disrepair, one gate hanging open. Smoke curled from the chimney, but there was no movement outside. She knocked once. No answer. Then she heard it, a sharp cry, small and choked. She pushed the door open. There, on the floor, was a little girl no older than 7, clutching a doll with one arm and pressing the other to a bleeding scrape on her knee. Her cheeks were tear-streaked, her braid half undone. Delaney dropped to her knees. "Hey, sweetheart. Where is Tobias?" The girl sniffed. "He went to get the doctor. Said not to move?" Delaney scooped her up, heart racing. "What happened to you?" "Fell from the porch." "Where is your mother?" The girl's face crumpled. "She left us. A year ago." Delaney held her tighter. When the door opened an hour later, Tobias froze in the doorway, breathless, eyes wide. "You found her," he said. Delaney stood, the child still in her arms. "You did not tell me you had a daughter. I did not know if I'd get the chance." He looked at her, eyes full of something raw and real. "Her name is Ada." Delaney turned to the girl, who had fallen asleep on her shoulder. "She is safe now." Tobias stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "You came. I was worried." He looked down. "I wanted to tell you about her. But I was afraid you would leave." She walked to him. "I do not scare that easy." He reached out, brushing her cheek with his calloused fingers. "You are not like anyone I have ever known. And you still like the sound of my laugh?" He smiled. "I think I love it." She smiled back. "Good. Because I do not plan on quieting down." He looked at her like she was the only thing he had ever wanted. And for the first time in a long time, Delaney Tabor felt like she belonged. 3 days passed before the rain came, a rare, soaking storm that darkened the earth and made the mesquite trees sigh. Delaney stood on the porch of Tobias's cabin, watching the drops slide off the roof in steady rivulets. Inside, Ada was curled on a braided rug with a tin of buttons Tobias had found tucked deep in an old trunk. She sorted them by color with the solemnity of a banker counting coins. Tobias stepped beside Delaney, his shirt sleeves rolled and damp from hauling in firewood. He leaned one shoulder against the post, his eyes following the rain. "She slept through the night," he said quietly. Delaney nodded. "She's starting to trust it's safe here." He didn't look at her, just let the words settle between them. "I've got a neighbor, Clara McKee. Lost her husband last spring. She's been asking if I knew anyone who might take up sewing work. Ada took to her when we passed through a few months ago. I was thinking, maybe she could stay with Clara when I have to ride out." Delaney turned toward him. "You don't want her alone here?" "No." She studied his profile, the water streaked through his dark hair, the faint crease between his brows. "You make your decisions slow. I don't like mistakes." She didn't press him. They stood there a while longer, listening to the soft thrum of rain on wood. Later that morning, Tobias saddled 2 horses. The second was smaller, older, but steady. He held the reins out to Delaney. "You up for a ride?" She pulled her shawl tighter. "Where to?" "Back edge of the property. There's something I want to show you." They rode through wet grass and low brush, the scent of creosote thick in the air. The horses moved slow, their hooves sinking into damp earth. It wasn't long before they crested a rise and came to a standstill. Below them stretched a long swale, rimmed with cottonwoods, the Gila River winding silver through the trees. What caught her eye, though, was the old adobe ruin near the water. Vines tangled through the broken doorway, and half the roof had caved in. "My father built that," Tobias said. "Before the war." She turned to him. "He was going to start a school for the ranch kids. Never got the chance. You thinking of finishing it?" I've been thinking about it since Ada started asking what letters mean. Delaney dismounted and walked closer. The ruins smelled of damp wood and clay. She ran her hand over the low wall. You could clear this out, patch the roof, bring in some benches. He stepped beside her, his voice low. Would you teach? She looked up at him, reins still clinging to her lashes. I haven't taught anything but myself. That's more than most. The wind picked up, rattling the cottonwoods. She felt the weight of the moment press around them, quiet, certain. I'd need a chalkboard, she said. I can make one. Her lips curved. And you'll find the children? I'll start with one, he said, eyes steady. When they returned, Ada ran to meet them, arms wide and muddy from some adventure behind the smokehouse. Tobias lifted her easily, pressing his forehead to hers, and Delaney watched the way his whole body softened in that motion. She didn't say anything. Not yet. That evening, Tobias lit the lamp while Delaney pulled a tin of beans from the hearth. Ada sat at the table, humming tunelessly, her finger tracing a circle on the wood. Miss Delaney, she said, do you know any stories? Delaney set the tin down. Only one that starts with a girl who didn't know where she belonged. Ada waited, expectant. She was a loud girl, Delaney said, sitting across from her. Too loud, they told her. She didn't know how to sit still, or keep her words soft. But one day, she met a man who said the sound of her laugh was the best thing he'd ever heard. Ada smiled, missing her front tooth. Then what happened? Delaney looked at Tobias, who was leaning against the stove, arms folded, watching her like she just said something holy. She stayed, Delaney said. That night, after Ada had fallen asleep beneath a quilt Tobias's mother had pieced years ago, Delaney stepped outside. The moon had risen, pale and full, and the air smelled of damp sage. Tobias joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders without a word. I've been thinking, she said, eyes on the sky. About the school. About this place. You don't have to decide tonight. I already have. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the back of it. You scare me, she whispered. Why? Because this feels like something I could build my life around. He took a breath, his fingers tightening around hers. That's what I want. She turned to him. I need to know this isn't just kindness. It isn't. You sure? I watched you carry my girl like she was your own. I watched you laugh in a room full of people who wanted you small. I heard the way you said chalkboard like it could change the world. I'm sure. She leaned into him then, her forehead resting against his chest. He held her close, the blanket slipping to the porch floor. Inside, the lamp flickered low. Outside, the stars pressed against the sky like they were listening. By early April, the cottonwoods along the river had begun to leaf out, their new green shimmering against the pale Arizona sky. The air held warmth now, not the brittle kind from winter fires but something looser, open, full of breath. Delaney stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching Tobias lift the last of the split cedar benches into place. He straightened with a grunt, wiped his brow, and met her gaze. You think it'll hold? He asked. She stepped inside, trailing her fingers along the smooth edge of the bench. If you built it, it will. He didn't answer, just looked around the room. The walls had been patched, whitewashed with lime she'd traded for in Florence. A window had been cut where the old one had rotted through, and a shelf now held the speller books she'd gathered one by one from neighboring ranches. There were only 6, but it was a start. He walked over, quiet but sure, and pointed to the far end of the room. I thought we could hang some slates there. I've got an iron hook from the wagon yoke that'll hold. Delaney nodded. I'll need something to keep the dust down. Maybe Clara has some oilcloth. I'll ask her, he said. She's been asking after you. I figured she might. He smiled then, not wide or showy, just a faint pull at the corner of his mouth. You've got the look of someone who knows what they want. She looked around the room. I do. Outside, Ada's voice floated in through the open window. She was showing a boy from the next homestead how to spin a stick between his palms to make it dance. Her laughter rang out, light and sudden. Delaney turned toward the sound. She's different now. No, Tobias said. She's just not scared anymore. The next few days passed in rhythm. Mornings began early, with Tobias riding out to check the cattle while Delaney swept the schoolhouse and laid out the afternoon's lessons. Ada walked there with 2 other children from the neighboring ranch, each of them carrying a biscuit in a cloth napkin and a tin water cup. One afternoon, as Delaney helped the youngest boy sound out the word, wagon, Tobias stepped into the doorway, his hat in hand. Can I borrow you for a minute? She glanced at the children. You 3 keep working on those letters. I'll be right back. Outside, he led her behind the shed where a young peach tree stood, its branches just beginning to bud. I found it growing wild out near the canal, he said. Thought it might like a softer place. She crouched to touch the soil around its base. You've got a good eye. I was thinking, he said slowly. Come summer, I'll need help with branding. I can hire on a hand, but I'd rather not bring in someone I don't know. She straightened. You want me to help? If you're willing. I've branded calves before, she said. And I've mended fence, and I know how to keep a fire burning through the night without wasting wood. He looked at her. I know. She brushed her hands on her skirt. Then ask me plain. He stepped closer. Delaney, I want you here. For all of it. The schoolhouse, the cattle, the dry years, the wet ones. I want you beside me. Not just for work. She met his eyes. You sure? I've been sure since the moment you laughed in that church. She reached up, her fingers grazing his jaw. The stubble was coarse, the skin warm. Then we'll make something of it. They didn't speak after that. He leaned forward, and she met him halfway. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that felt like it had been waiting for years, quiet, complete, the kind that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. That night she stayed. Not just in the house, but truly stayed. She folded her things into the cedar chest at the foot of his bed and hung her shawl beside his coat. Ada helped, solemnly laying her doll on the window ledge so it could watch and learn. The days shaped themselves around new patterns. Mornings came with coffee boiled over a flame and Ada's small feet pattering across the floor. Tobias taught her to mend harness leather, and Delaney taught him how to build a reading lesson from a single word. They argued sometimes about the best way to store seed, or how many students could fit on the benches, but the arguments were brief. Neither one of them had time for pride. One evening, a rancher from across the river rode up with 3 children in tow. Heard you've got a teacher, he said. Delaney nodded. That's right. They'll be here Monday. She smiled. They'll need slates. I'll bring 'em. Afterward, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Tobias built a fire outside and pulled a blanket around Delaney's shoulders. Ada dozed beside them, thumb tucked beneath her chin. You ready for a full room? He asked. I was born ready, she said. He looked over at her, eyes soft in the firelight. You're not just loud, Delaney. You're strong. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I can be both. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. I wouldn't want you any other way. The wind moved through the grass, and the stars blinked awake one by one. Behind them, the house stood solid, its windows glowing with lamplight. The future didn't need promises. It was already unfolding, steady as the river below. On the first morning of May, Delaney stood barefoot in the yard behind the house, hanging a line of wet linens beneath the pale blue sky. The breeze was warm, gentle, carrying the scent of mesquite blossoms and the faint smoke from the cook fire Tobias had just banked. Ada's giggle rose from somewhere near the barn, followed by the low murmur of Clara McKee coaxing her into stillness long enough to braid her hair. Delaney didn't look up when Tobias stepped behind her. She felt him instead, the quiet of him, the grounded way he stood, as if he belonged to the earth and the horizon both. I've been thinking, he said, taking the next damp sheet from her arms without asking. About building a smokehouse. With the school growing, we'll need better ways to keep meat through summer. She passed him a clothespin. You've got time between branding and fence mending for that? He hung the sheet beside hers. I'll make time. She glanced sideways. Still thinking slow? He gave a low breath of a laugh. I'm thinking clear. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that had grown easy between them. The last sheet caught the wind and snapped once before settling. Delaney stepped back to admire the line. How long do you think this piece will last? She asked, folding her arms. Tobias didn't try to soothe her with empty words. Instead, he looked toward the ridge where the sun had begun its steady climb. Long as we keep working at it. She nodded once, then turned toward the house. I found Ada tracing letters in the dirt with a twig yesterday. She made a crooked B and said that was for beans and her boots. I've never seen her take to something so fast, he said. She's stubborn. Like someone else I know. He looked at her then, and there was a pause between them, not uncertain, just full. I asked Clara to stay for supper, Delaney said, heading inside. By dusk, the table was full. Clara brought a crock of stewed pumpkin and a jar of preserved limes. Tobias cut slices of venison he'd smoked last fall and served them on tin plates alongside fresh cornbread Delaney had baked in the Dutch oven. Candles flickered in glass jars, their glow softening the cedar walls. Clara leaned her elbows on the table. You know, Ada told me she wants to be a teacher now. Delaney looked over at the girl, who was chewing with great focus. That's so? Ada nodded solemnly. I want to write books about cows and thunderstorms. Tobias grinned, but said nothing. Clara set down her fork. She's steady now. I remember when she wouldn't say 2 words in a row. Delaney met her eyes. She's got her own rhythm. We just had to learn how to listen. After Clara rode home and Ada had been tucked beneath her patched quilt, Delaney stepped outside again, Tobias following without a word. The sky was flushed with stars, and somewhere downriver, a coyote called. He handed her a mug of chicory coffee, still warm from the stovetop. She took a sip and let the bitterness settle on her tongue. I saw a wagon today, he said, quiet. A family from Kansas. 2 boys and a baby in a flour sack cradle. They asked where the school was. She leaned on the porch rail. You tell them? I pointed them here. She didn't reply right away. You all right with that? He asked. She looked at him. I don't want to be known for leaving things half done. He nodded slowly. I didn't think you would. They stood a while longer, watching the wind ripple over the grass. Then Delaney turned toward him, her voice low. My mother used to say a woman's voice should be soft enough not to wake a sleeping dog. I tried, for a while, to be that kind of woman. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I never fit it. I was always waking things up. Tobias reached for her hand, his grip warm and firm. You woke me up. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. I think I like who I've become here. I love who you've become here, he said. She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. Inside, the lamp burned low. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. It held stories now of lessons learned, of laughter unquiet, of a girl who once was told to hush and a man who knew better. By morning, they'd rise again to feed the stock, to teach the children, to build what needed building. But for now, on that quiet porch beneath a sky full of stars, they simply stood together knowing that peace, the kind they'd made with their own hands, could last as long as they kept choosing it. The heat settled early that summer, dry and pressing, curling the leaves of the cottonwoods and turning the air thick with the scent of sun-warmed earth. Delaney rolled her sleeves as she walked the fence line with Tobias, counting posts and noting where the wire sagged low. She carried a strip of canvas soaked in vinegar water tied around her neck, and Tobias had fashioned a wide-brimmed hat from stiffened palm to keep the worst of the sun off her face. They stopped where the fence dipped near the wash. A jackrabbit darted from the brush, its ears flashing once before vanishing into mesquite. "This one need more than tightening," she said, pointing to a post that leaned forward, nearly pulled from the ground. Tobias knelt and dug his fingers into the sand. "It's dry down here. We'll need to pack it tight with river clay or it'll just pull loose again." She crouched beside him, wiping sweat from her brow. "I'll bring a bucket down before supper." He didn't reply right away, just kept working the soil, his hands moving with quiet certainty. "You ever think of adding goats?" she asked. His hands paused. "Goats? You've got enough brush, and they'll clear the thorns better than fire ever could. Plus, Clara said she knew someone near Bowie who's selling off a healthy pair." He glanced up, eyes catching hers under the brim of her hat. "You thinking about the herd now?" "I'm thinking about the schoolhouse roof. We'll need more pitch come fall. Goats help us buy it faster." A slow grin tugged at his mouth. "You planning 5 years out now?" "I'm planning for what's ours." He stood, brushing his palms clean. "Then we'll talk to Clara's man." They finished the fence line before the shadows stretched long. Back at the house, Ada helped Clara peel onions in the shade while Delaney boiled a pot of beans on the fire Tobias had built. The girl hummed a tune she said she learned from the neighbor boy, and Delaney couldn't help but notice how easily Ada had taken to the rhythm of shared work. After supper, Clara lingered with a cup of chicory while the air cooled and night birds called from the trees. "You've done something good here," she said, eyes on Ada, who was drawing shapes in the dust with her heel. Delaney nodded. "It feels like something we built right." Clara looked over. "You thinking of marrying him?" Delaney didn't answer immediately. She watched Tobias through the open window, where he sat at the table carving a new handle for the draw knife. "I don't need a ring to know what we are," she said softly. "But I reckon I'd say yes if he asked." Clara rose, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Then I hope he does." The next morning, Tobias saddled the horses before sunrise. "We'll ride out past the ridge," he said. "I want to show you something." They packed water and a small sack of cornmeal biscuits Delaney had baked the night before. Ada stayed with Clara, who promised to take her gathering along the riverbank. The ride was long, the land rising in slow, rocky swells. They didn't speak much. The hush between them wasn't emptiness, it was comfort, like the shaded side of a barn on a hot day. When they reached the crest, Delaney drew her horse to a stop. Below lay a narrow valley, green even at the edges of summer, with a spring-fed stream winding through the middle. A grove of pecan trees grew along the bank, their trunks thick and silvery. Tobias dismounted, tying the reins to a low branch. "This was my mother's favorite place." Delaney joined him, laying a hand on the rough bark. "It's beautiful." He crouched and brushed aside the leaves until a flat stone showed through. Carved deep into its surface were 2 initials, worn but still clear. "She brought us here every spring," he said. "Said it was where things began again." Delaney knelt beside him. "You been waiting to show me this?" He nodded once. "I asked you to stay?" "You did. I asked you to build a life. You already started." She reached for his hand. He turned toward her. "Now I'm asking if you'll marry me." Her voice didn't catch. It didn't falter. "Yes." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a narrow band of braided horsehair, looped and tied with a strip of softened hide. "I made this," he said. "Took me weeks to get the braid right." She took it gently, slid it onto her finger, and looked up at him. "It's perfect." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "So are you." They sat beneath the trees until the light shifted golden through the branches. No rush. No need for more words. A week later, they were married beneath that grove. Clara stood beside Delaney, and the neighbor boy held Ada's hand as she scattered wildflowers in the grass. Tobias wore his best shirt, mended at the cuff, and Delaney wore a blue calico dress that Clara had helped her stitch new. The preacher from Florence read from a small book, and when he asked if they'd honor each other, Delaney looked straight at Tobias and said, "With all I am." Afterward, They shared bread and boiled coffee with the handful of neighbors who had ridden out. Ada sat on Tobias's shoulders most of the day, tugging at his hair and announcing to anyone who passed, "That's my new mama, and she teaches real good." As the sun sank low and the last wagon pulled away, Tobias and Delaney walked back to the house together, fingers laced. Inside, the lamp flickered warm against the walls. The schoolhouse stood ready for the coming season, the goats bleated from their pen, and Ada's small boots sat side by side beside the door. Tobias turned to her, voice low. "You ready for the rest of it?" Delaney smiled, her hand resting over his heart. "I already said yes." And she meant it in every way a woman could. Because what they had wasn't just survival. It was home. It was a life built with care and sweat and laughter that no one would silence. They slept that night with the window open, the stars visible through the trees, and the sound of the wind moving soft and steady across the land they now called theirs. And nothing, not even time, would undo what they had made together.